how are you modeling failure for your daughters, for your sons? And what's a failure culture in your home? Because remember, it's not the talk that counts, it's the walk that counts. And it's so vital for us to really understand as women how to manage failures, because there is no life without failure. And failure is one of the greatest opportunity for us to actually grow and expand, because without failing, how do we actually evolve and make it better and make ourselves better? So failure is actually an irreplaceable path towards freedom, towards greatness, towards wholeness, towards a life of joy, right? We need to be able to manage failure as part. Now, the question is, how are you as a mother right now teaching your daughters to understand that failure is not just part of the journey, but it actually makes the journey sweet? Okay, because we need to train our daughters, our sons, and who we are to actually see failure as an opportunity for growth. So in our home, is failure a bad thing? When they come home with a bad grade, with a failure, do you say, oh my gosh, that's awful? Is there labels attached to failure of not being good enough, of, how horrible there is? When it comes to failure, do we have a passive aggressive attitude when our children fail? Do we not let them work in the kitchen because it looks a lot like a hot mess before they actually learn? The kitchen is the most, I would say, clear and simple way for us to actually teach our children failures without the collateral damage yet. Because when do they learn to fail and learn from it? Not when they're 12 or 13 or 18. They should learn at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 incrementally, so that when it comes to major and big decisions with massive consequence, they know how to manage failures, and they've practiced their competencies and how to think through all the different ways they can manage their mind in the process of trying to do something. So in the kitchen, it's awesome when you're like, okay, that egg should have been cracked in the bowl and not outside the bowl. But guess what? A cracked it outside the bowl is a much better consequence than perhaps a negative influence from a friend, right? So this is where we actually teach them that failure is part of a beautiful life. So that when they fail at home, when they break a glass, when they don't crack the egg, when they don't make a bed, or they make a bad decision, do we chew them out, or do we say, okay, how can we actually gain from this failure? What can we grow from? Honey, failure is part of it. Let's celebrate the failure by growing from it, right? So that now they see that it's part of the culture that they have, so that they don't allow failure to limit what it is that they were created to do and also be, so that they don't have this limited understanding that now they're defined by their failure as opposed to being refined by it. And that's how we need to actually teach our daughters that failure is an opportunity for refinement and does not define our worth. So when you talk to your daughters, tell them that failure is the greatest opportunity for growth. We do this thing in our home called the GFG, which is, we do it every dinner. My 2-year-old can do it. Now she's 3 actually. And it's gratitude, failure, and growth, which means that we go around the table at dinner. Dinner is very sacred for us. And so we try to do as much as we can, have dinner together. And every dinner we sit down and we talk about, okay, what are you grateful for? How have you failed today? And how have you grown from those failures? And when my children say, well, I don't know how I failed today, then my husband would say, well, maybe you're not daring big enough. Maybe you're not trying, other things that are uncomfortable, so that they know that failure is part of it. And so, I had this actually experience with our neighbor, and my 8-year-old, Ina, was playing with a friend, and the mom was there, and she was telling me the story of my daughter. And she's saying that her daughter made a mistake, and she was, critical, and she wanted to just throw the towel. And so my daughter, sweet Ina, saying, listen, failure is part of it, and that you can always find a solution, and that you shouldn't let your mindset of failure make you feel like you can't move on. And, she's 8, and I teach myself to do this, and I am a grown adult, and I teach thousands of women to do this. So my point in saying that is that we equip our daughter early enough, then we don't risk them being pummeled by a world that's constantly making them feel like a failure. Okay. Making them feel like a failure is so damaging because they don't have the capacity yet to create distinctions that failing, okay, is normal, but I'm not a failure just because I have failed. So literally the script that we have as a mom is say, your failures does not make you a failure. Okay. That's so important. Your failures does not make you a failure. You are not a failure because of you failed. But as a mom, you have to also know that your failures, not, making dinner or not finishing a project or having a house clean, does not also define you, right? So that your children, how to equip them, but also you might have, children who make you feel bad. Say, mom, you totally messed up, or you yelled at me, and, and now, they make up a story in their head because you raise your voice, and you literally are able to look at them and say, sweetie, have you failed in your life? Have you failed? And have I made you feel small when you failed? Or was that a moment where you feel like, okay, I failed and I'm going to grow from it? Well, I'd love to be able to do everything right all the time. But yes, I yelled at you. And I want you to know that that's not the mom I want to be. But when I fail, I need you to love me and not have stories in your head that make me feel like I'm a bad mom because I yelled at you at one point. We need to create those boundaries because they could use that to manipulate us and make us also feel like a bad mom. I hear this over and over again with so many moms that what their daughters say about them or what their children, they ruminate as opposed to actually hold their daughters accountable and say, listen, you fail and I fail. The point is that I'm growing from my failure. That's the key word, is that you're growing from your failure because you can't hold them accountable unless you too are growing from your failure. And so by modeling how you're growing from your failure and making sure that you're not defined by your failure, they get to witness you walk the walk and not just talk. So go out there, ladies, and train our failure muscle so that you can model for them what it's like to dare greatly, choose to be the woman that we're created to be, and knowing that failure is going to be peppered all throughout the journey. But really, that's what makes the journey sweet.